Welcome, everyone. Today, we're talking about no more late nights, overcoming procrastination in children. I'm your host, Ann Dolin, and for the last 23 years, my team of tutors and I have been helping kids with all sorts of obstacles. And I have to say, especially now in this pandemic, procrastination is at the top of the list. You know, every day parents call our office looking for help for their kids. And a couple of weeks ago, this just comes to mind when I think about procrastination. This mom called and she was so frustrated with her son, who is actually like a really good kid and a hard worker, and he wanted to do his best in school, but he was just chronically disorganized and, not to name a big procrastinator. And he was especially having a hard time in math. So his grades were not great. And she said to him, look, I've had it. You, instead of doing stuff at the last minute, you need to get on top of your stuff. So right now, I want you to go to your room, look at all the things you have to do this week, and I want you to get it done early. And they got into this big argument about it, that she finally went out, he traipsed up to his room, and he actually did. He started to get his work done. And the work was really hard for him, she reported later when she called her office. And it turns out there's a reason why. The next day after his math class, he went to her and he said, Mom, oh my gosh, I thought I was getting ahead, but I actually did next week's work, not this week's work. So can you imagine the frustration for him? No wonder it was hard. He had all these holes in his learning. He didn't really understand things, kind of like Swiss cheese. He understood some concepts, but not all. And why is this? Is it that he struggled with math? Actually, to some degree, but the reality is that he had no tools in his toolkit for ways in which to plan ahead, to figure out what to do, and to calendar it out. He basically let procrastination take a hold of him day in and day out until it really devolved into a fight with him and his mom. And then he planned ahead the wrong way. So procrastination in all kids is super real. We know from a self-report study that 86% of high school students say that they procrastinate. It actually gets worse in college. 88% of kids procrastinate. But we also know there is some good news that after college, it tends to level out and get better. And then into adulthood, not so much. Now, it's interesting, within this group of procrastinators, 92% are males. And I don't know why that is. There was nothing in these studies that said why boys tend to procrastinate more than girls, but it's been my experience and working with lots of kids over the years that girls tend to be planners a bit more. They tend to be a little bit more methodical in their approach, where boys often are fine flying by the seat of their pants. Now, within these groups of procrastinators, we know that this is especially problematic for 20% of the kids. Here's the truth. 20% of students are dysfunctional procrastinators, and the 80% of the other kids are functional. So what does this mean? Because not all procrastination is created equal, to be honest. Dysfunctional procrastinators are kids that get into real trouble with this. Let's say they get an assignment on Monday. It's a multi-step assignment. It's going to take some time. It's due on Friday. They realize they haven't done it on Thursday night. They start to do it, but they can't focus enough to get it done. Or maybe they set their alarm early on Friday morning, but for one reason or another, they just don't get it done. And everybody knows. They know, they're upset. Usually the parent knows, they're yelling at the kid. The teacher knows because it hasn't been turned in or it's turned in late. And it's super clear in the grade book because the students' grades have suffered too. Now, for the rest of the kids, this 80%, they're functional procrastinators. These kids have kind of learned this behavior over time. So they may still start it on Thursday night, but they kind of like this feeling. Their adrenaline is pumping, their back is against the wall, and they have the inertia to power through and get it done. They think they need this level of bubbling up in order to follow through. Now, functional procrastinators are different in that they see no problem with this. They don't really have a pain point because it doesn't affect them so much. Yeah, they're stressed out. Could their work quality be better? For sure. We know for all procrastinators, they don't get the same grades as non-procrastinators and their work quality suffers. But it's not a big deal. Yeah, it stresses their parents out too, but the teacher doesn't know. They turn it in on time. It's not reflected in the grade book. They're doing perfectly fine. They don't have a pain point. And for these kids, often if a parent says you need to start earlier or stop procrastinating, it doesn't do a whole lot of good. I also believe that pandemic has made things worse because kids just don't have the structured days like they did when they were in school. And also, to be honest, they're not feeling as good about themselves. They're kind of down, they lack motivation, they feel zoomed out. There's a great book I can recommend on this topic. It's called Solving the Procrastination Puzzle by Timothy Peichel. And he says that actually procrastination is not a time management problem. It's an emotional management problem. And honestly, that makes total sense. Think of it this way. You need to do math homework, but you're flipping through TikTok videos. Which one is your brain going to prefer? The easy, fun one that feels good or the hard, arduous one that feels daunting? Your brain wants to go with the easy thing. So it's not that you can't manage your time. It's that you can't manage your emotions to say, you know what, this probably isn't a great idea to keep watching TikTok videos for hours on end. Why is that? Well, it happens to do with our brain function. You know, the frontal lobe is where all of our executive functions are housed. These things, we'll talk about them in a second, these skills are really important for school success. But interestingly, kids don't develop them at the same pace. And some kids have pretty well developed frontal lobes. These are the kids that don't procrastinate as much, but some kids don't really. Now, certainly these skills get better as people get older, but for some students, it really is a problem over time. Here are the executive functions. There's lots of them, actually. There are 8 of them, but the one we're going to focus on today is initiation, which is really just a good old-fashioned word for getting started. Now, the other ones that we work on with kids too are inhibition, which is really your ability to bat away distractions. I think another one that's super important now is planning and organization. Do you know what you have to do, and can you create a plan for it? Of course, these are all important to our kids, but what we do know is that when kids struggle with things like procrastination, it's not because they want to frustrate us or annoy us or that they simply don't care. But oftentimes it is that they don't have well-developed executive functions. And because they don't always have a pain point, they're really not mature enough to look at the future and say, well, if I continue to watch TikTok videos, this is going to be bad because I won't do my math homework, understand the concepts, do well on this test, get a good report card grade. They don't have that ability to look into the future if they don't have fabulous executive function skills. But that's okay because behavior can be improved. And even if you have your child has these limitations, there are certain things parents and professionals can do that can make a huge difference. So first, before we start, I want to talk about why kids really procrastinate. Because as parents, we think there's just one reason. They can do it, but they just don't want to. But honestly, that is not all kids. The first category, know how to do it, don't want to. A lot of times kids are overwhelmed and they're underprepared. So going back to TikTok math homework, we assume TikTok is just better. But really, sometimes kids feel like math is too difficult and hard. They may know they don't understand all the concepts. So it's another reason to avoid. But also we have these kids that are perfectionists. There's not as many of them, but these are the students that will put stuff off, will procrastinate because they're afraid the end product won't be good enough. So let's take that first group. Actually, this applies to all groups, but particularly this first group that just doesn't want to get started. The first thing that kids need to do is recognize the situation. That's it, even for adults. We have to know we're about to do it. We have to know we're about to procrastinate. If we don't see the problem in the moment, we cannot fix it. So we have to know, you know what? I'm going to go down this rabbit hole of TikTok, and this is bad. We see the problem. We know we're about to do it. And then we need to get our executive functions fired up by using self-talk, specifically if-then scenarios. Here's one. You say to yourself, if I finish this math, then I can go to dinner with my friends and not have it hanging over my shoulders. So you're basically engaging in time travel in a way. This is what Timothy Pikel calls it. You're looking into the future. So first, know you're going to do it, and then using some good old-fashioned self-talk, talking to yourself, you put it into an if-then scenario. We help kids do this all the time. It's vital. You can't teach strategies unless you first do these first two steps are accomplished. Then kids need to make getting started really easy. They have to say to their brain, look, brain, it's honestly not that bad. First, I know I'm doing it. Second, I have to get this done so that I can go out to dinner with my friends and not be worried about this. And it's not that bad after all. So here's how you tell your brain it's not that bad after all. One way is using a timer. I personally think timers are gold for kids that procrastinate. Here's the reason. They don't have this external sense of getting going. Internal. There's nothing in their bodies that say, hey, you need to get started. And so if they don't have this internal thrust, they've got to get an external tool to help them. And that's why timers are so brilliant. So there's 3 ways you can use a timer to get started. Set it for 5 minutes. We call this 5 minutes of fury. Set it for tolerable 10. Anybody can tolerate anything for 10 minutes. Take your kid's age and add 1. These are all short time periods. And then we teach our students to develop a mantra. And here's how it goes. I'm going to work as hard as I can, as best I can, focus as much as I can for just 10 minutes. And then I can take a break, just a couple minutes, or I can keep on going. 9 times out of 10, they can keep on going. Now, sometimes kids will need a broader swath of time to get things done. Enter the Pomodoro technique, which was developed by a researcher in the 80s, an Italian guy. And in fact, an Italian tomato means Pomodoro. And he used a tomato timer when he did this research. He wanted to see, what is the optimal amount of time for people to get work done and not feel so constrained by motivation or focus issues. Was it 10 minutes, 90 minutes, 60 minutes? He found it was actually 25 minutes. So we'll teach kids how to use the timer. Maybe it's beyond the 5 minutes of getting started, but now they can get going. They're going to set it for longer, for 25. They set it for 25 minutes, use the same mantra, work as hard as I can, as best as I can, focus as much as I can on this map, and then I'll take a break. The break with Pomodoro is 5 minutes. Now, if you can string together a couple of Pomodoros, fabulous. But if you're working with a younger student and they can only do one, hey, that's great. So here's how it works for an older student or an adult. This is all the brain can handle, by the way, is 4. Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro. Again, little kids, maybe 1. Maybe you've got an ADHD high schooler, maybe 2 Pomodoros. But that's better than you yelling at them to get started or fighting over their procrastination or looking at their grade report and seeing they haven't turned things in. This strategy can make a difference. But sometimes we see kids that do not like timers. They make them feel anxious. So for those kids, we recommend breaking up the task by what you can do that's super easy. So you say to yourself, you know what? I'm just going to do the first 2 math problems, or I'm going to go through and pick the easy ones and just do those. I'm only going to write the first few sentences of this essay. Oh God, research, that stinks. I'm just going to gather 2 sources and then I'm going to take a break. So that's really tackling something you don't want to do by task. Now, let's come back to those other 2 groups, the ones that are overwhelmed and underprepared, and the kids that are perfectionists. How do we help them? This is a strategy that one of our tutors came up with, and I just love it. I think it's so brilliant. It's helping kids that have difficulty prioritizing their work. They think everything is a big deal and they're chronically stressed out, into a more doable task list. So what we do is we help them to figure out all the things they need to get done, not just that day, but what else is coming due that week. And we'll help them to break it down into 3 categories. Number 1, must do. These are the assignments that are really important to the student's grade. They count for a lot and they're due tomorrow. You really have to get them done today. They're categorized must do. Should do. Yeah, you should do it, but it's not due tomorrow. So if you don't get it done, not the end of the world. The could do's are the nice to haves. And this is where the perfectionists really have a hard time. If they've already studied maybe for an hour for a science test, they have no problem studying another hour. But you know what? Do they really? Yeah, they could do that, but do they need to? Maybe not. Maybe that can come off their list. So now you're really dealing with the must-dos for that day. It's a lot easier to tackle. Here are some other strategies. Tip 5, start on the day it's assigned. If you get an assignment on a Tuesday, it's due on Thursday. Do not wait until Wednesday night at 10 o'clock. That's not a good idea. You really want to start on the day it's assigned on Tuesday, even if you just start. You write your name and you do 2 questions or 2 problems. That's it. You really just want to get started. And here's why. Because if you get into trouble and you don't know how to do it, or you don't understand the directions, you want to isolate the need and then ask for help. So this could be contacting your teacher by email or raising your hand in the online lesson. It could be, if you're lucky enough to go to school in the hybrid model, that you can see her or him the next day and ask about what's giving you difficulty. You can ask your tutor. A tutor could be a high school student down the street. It could be a college student home from break. It could be a professional, which is what we do. We help kids all the time in between sessions that are kind of stuck. Or it could be connecting with a friend. And I'm going to talk more about this in a second, because it's really, really important. All right, so tip 7, think ahead by using weekends. With your kids, this is really easy to actually do. You can say, let's set up one time a week on a Sunday. I like Sundays because you're kind of getting ready for the week ahead. Piggyback it on something you already do. Maybe you always have Sunday dinner from, 6 to 7. Set this up from 7 to 7:20. Maybe your middle son plays basketball on Sunday nights. This is right after it. The idea is you say to your kids, this would be for older kids that are really having a hard time with procrastination and they have long-term assignments. You say to them 2 questions. What do you have coming up? And when will you do it? And then their task is not for you to micromanage, but in their own way, however they want to do it. They look ahead at their week. They go on Blackboard, or it could be on Google Classroom, and they determine what they have to do, and they create some kind of way to get it done. You do not have to nitpick anything. You're just giving them the gift of time to look ahead at their week. This is for all kids. Who couldn't benefit from this? I do this every Sunday. I look ahead at my week. I confirm appointments. I see what I have going on. It just helps prepare me. Same with kids. Tip 8, what I discussed earlier, find an accountability partner. Sometimes when kids are struggling with procrastination, if it's all up to them, it's just going to continue to be a real issue. But if they have a friend and they know that they're going to have a hard time getting the study guide done because they really don't like chemistry, they can say to a friend, hey, can we meet on Wednesday at 4? Maybe it's over Zoom, and do the study guide together. That's a great idea for procrastinators, to have that accountability partner. All right, so let's see, I'm looking at the time. I thought I would speak for maybe like 30, 35 minutes, and then we go to Q&A. And so there is a Q&A box at the top. If you have a question at any point, please, right now, go ahead and put it in there, and I'm going to get to them in about 5 minutes or so. I thought I'd take a a little detour and talk about digital distractions, because this is one issue. Procrastination is on a rise during the pandemic. Kids they always had their phones and their laptops in front of them, during homework time, but not necessarily all the time at school. Now it's 24/7. And the research can glean important ways to help kids deal with some of these distractions. In fact, there was a study out of Stanford that looked at tech breaks and found that when students kept their phone in another room instead of right next to them, they were a lot more successful and less distracted. And the time limit was 20 minutes. So they put their phone into another room for 20 minutes and they did their work, and they went and checked their text messages or sent a Snapchat, and then they went back to it. So this is something when we work with kids on troubleshooting, we'll talk about, could a tech break work for you? It might, or it might not. Let's experiment and see. Here are some other distraction blockers. These are actually in the family of website blockers. There's a lot of them out there, but these are just some our students have used and continue to use. One is self-control. It's for Macs. Stay Focused is a Chrome extension, and Focus Booster is actually based on the Pomodoro technique. It's set for 25-minute segments. So here's what they do. Kids know what websites are distracting to them. They're super honest and will always tell us, like, oh, I watched surfing videos on YouTube for 2 hours today. That means YouTube's distracting. So they blacklist the sites they deem to be distracting, and then they'll set a timer for a certain amount of time. And no matter what they do, they can try to disable the app or restart their computer. They can't get to those sites. So it kind of goes, I'd say, with that executive function skill of self-awareness and a little bit with time travel. If I know I'm having difficulty and I want to get something done so that I can go out with my friends later, or I can get a good grade, they may see I need help, and the help can come from these distraction blockers that they utilize during the day and during homework time. Another one is similar. It's called Forest, but it's just for the phone. And I love Forest. I got this idea actually from a 7th grader at Robinson Middle School many years ago. And a lot of kids like Forest too. I have it on my phone as well. But with Forest, let's say your problem isn't, playing video games when you should be in class. It's really that you're going on the rabbit hole of your phone. You can click on Forest. And once you do that, a tree will start to grow on the home screen of your phone. You set it for a specific amount of time to stay focused. In this example, it's 35 minutes, which I think is a little bit long. Maybe it's for a shorter period of time, 25, 10, whatever. And during that time, you can't go to other apps. You can't go to Snapchat. You can't go to Instagram. You can't go to TikTok, or Forest will give you a warning and it will say, get back to focus, get out of those apps or a tree will wither and die. Nobody wants a dead tree. Everybody wants to be able to see their tree grow to fruition and plant it in their forest. And then the app will say, you want to go again. And then lastly, probably one of my favorite strategies for kids, especially our perfectionist kids, is to forgive yourself. It's so easy to beat yourself up when you procrastinate and you feel like a jerk when you should be doing something and you choose not to. It doesn't make sense. It's like your brain is in this big argument. So what research says is that procrastinators who forgave themselves performed better on the next test than people who didn't. So the people that continue to beat themselves up over it and thought about all the things that they did poorly, they didn't do as well on the next test as the people that said, you know what, yes, I really should have handled this differently, but this is how I'm going to approach it in the future. Those people tend to do better. So we always want to make sure with our kids that we're not looking in the rearview mirror, not asking questions like, well, what would you have done differently? Kids hate those questions. They don't end well. We work with kids. We don't ask those anymore. It's not helpful. All I care about is how will you tackle this in the future? That's really all that matters. Because at the end of the day, honestly, it's all about relationships with our kids. Does it really matter what they got in fourth grade social studies? Probably not. Does it matter if they got, a C on an AP exam? Maybe not so much. Does it matter that they have missed math problems, misspelled words, not enough adjectives in a sentence? No, it really doesn't. At the end of the day, what matters the most is our relationship with our kids, and that we're not taking on that role of the heavy-handed police, the homework police. It doesn't end well for our kids. Instead, we can outsource a lot of this stuff as parents. It could be, as I mentioned, you have a younger child, the high school student down the street. You are mom or dad. They can help with some of the other issues that are going on. It might be a professional, which is what we do. Now, we see these things as that kids struggle with is something they need a system around. Kind of like the kid that I mentioned at the beginning, who he and his mom were always fighting about him getting his work done. He decided to be proactive, and he planned too far ahead. He didn't really have tools in his kit. So we use the 4Ds framework. And the first step, I call it, it's really the 4Ds: do, down, decide, and done. First, we help kids determine what's coming due. And often this is in different places. It might be on Blackboard. It could be in another homework portal the teacher has. It might be in Google Classroom. Sometimes it's disorganized. We want to figure out what's coming due, what's due the next day, what's due later in the week. And then number 2 is to write it down. Put these due dates into a calendar. Typically, it's Google Calendar that we use, but sometimes we have kids that refuse to use it. So they might like using a whiteboard. Some kids want to use a journal or a notebook. It honestly doesn't matter. They just need a system around it. And this is probably the most important thing. It used to be that I thought, well, if kids had a plan, they would execute upon it. And the answer is actually, that's not correct. What I found over the years is that kids need to troubleshoot in advance what could possibly go wrong, what could derail them. So that's where decide comes in. Decide what could sidetrack you. And so we're always having discussions with kids like what could get in your way. And over time, when our coaches work with a child, we start to see a pattern. And it's usually the same thing for certain kids. They'll say it's their phone, or it's that they're playing Roblox, or they're, whatever it is. So we'll ask, okay, what's the strategy that you're going to use this week? You said that you're going to do your note. You were going to do your note cards for science on Tuesday from 4:30 to 5. What will you do if you get your note cards out and you don't feel like doing them? What's one strategy that you might consider at that point? So troubleshooting the things that could get in their way, especially with procrastination. And then the days that we see them, we're helping them to actually get it done. We determine what is the hardest assignment for you to tackle. Because for the kids that are overwhelmed and underprepared, they need help just getting started. So we'll determine their toughest assignment and just push them into the right direction, help them get going on it. But then we also have a plan for when we're not there so that they can be independent. And that's the 4Ds framework. So I'd love to do questions now. And let's see. So let me go to my first one. And also, if you have a question, please feel free to throw it into the Q&A. That would be terrific. What do you suggest for kids who know they should set a timer, put electronics in the next room, etc.? My son has considered and rejected every suggestion. He's smart, but running himself into the ground. Now, it could be that there's a power struggle going on, meaning that the more you push, the more he pushes back. And sometimes over time, the more a parent pushes, especially for boys, the more they just kind of disengage. They walk away, they close the door, they won't talk to us. So whenever you feel like you've tried these things and they're just, wanting to have nothing to do with it, you have two choices. One, you could say, this is a sign I need to step back and not get so involved and let him start to figure it out. It doesn't mean that you're giving up and you're saying, you know what, this is your problem, not mine. I already went to 7th grade. No, we're not going to go there. We want to obviously have a safety net. So you might do things like just set up the time on Sunday night where you say, this is for everybody in the house. Do not micromanage them. Just give them the time to look ahead. It could be that you outsource it and you say, I just don't want this role anymore. I want somebody else to take it over. And I've found with a lot of the coaches that work with kids in this capacity, honestly, it's all about the relationship. If they feel, the student feels like, first of all, they like the person, they have fun with that person, they feel like they're getting work accomplished, there's a rapport, they're willing to take suggestions from somebody else far better than a parent. And it could be that the parent says the exact same thing. Here's a timer strategy, but they're much more willing to do it from somebody else. So those would be my suggestions, to step aside or to outsource it, but also sometimes, for example, to turn a blind eye. I love this strategy, by the way. I've used it with my own kids who are now in college many times. I remember my youngest son, he's a freshman in college now. When he was a senior, it was right when the pandemic happened and he was learning from home, and he had this habit of staying up really late at night. And at first it really bothered me because I knew he needed to get up in the morning, and he is the kind of kid that needs a little bit more sleep than most. But I would say, how are you doing? Are you able to get up? And if I found that he was able to function all right on his own, and he always got up on time, but I still thought he should get more sleep. But when I intervened, he just honestly, he completely ignored me. So I started doing the blind eye strategy. And I said, look, I'm willing to turn a blind eye to you watching Netflix, but I only ask that you're up on time and you're logged in on time for your first class. And that was it, because generally he was before, but I just wanted to make a statement like, I'm willing to, not pay attention to this if you're willing to do this. And he was like, deal. Okay, fine. And sometimes turning a blind eye is really helpful to our kids. All right, my son likes to watch YouTube during virtual class, but some classes use specific YouTube videos as part of the curriculum. How do I block specific YouTube videos? Honestly, I'm not sure about that. I think I might have the discussion with him initially and say, which classes do you need to watch YouTube videos for? Is there a particular teacher that shows YouTube videos? I have to think it's not too many teachers. It's probably not every teacher. And then you might even ask the question, so if the science teacher doesn't watch YouTube, have you watched YouTube videos? What could be a way that if you feel you're distracted by videos, that could help you stay focused on your class? I'd honestly just throw it back in his court and ask, what are some strategies that you might use to stay focused? Because if we try to micromanage and we try to look over our kids' shoulders or, take their phones away or restrict them, those types of punitive measures don't tend to work. So I might just start out with a discussion and ask what strategies he has for himself to stay focused. All right, so I think that's all the questions. So here's what I would love to do right now. First, I would love to know what was helpful to you today. What was a takeaway that helped you? And go to the chat. And if you wouldn't mind, really quick, just throw it in the chat. What was helpful, a takeaway? And Allison, Erin, and Nicole, feel free to throw in something as well. That would be great. So Lisa said, must do, should do, could do. Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. And you can send it to, instead of just all the panelists, feel free to have that go out to the attendees as well. I love must do, should do, could do. Thank you, Lisa. It's been really helpful to a lot of kids, especially our anxious ones. Anybody else have a takeaway? Learning the reasons kids procrastinate, from Carrie. why they procrastinate in the first place. That was really helpful. And Nicole said, forgiving yourself, yes, and looking to the future instead of looking in the rearview mirror. Awesome. Thanks for that, Nicole. From Lisa, she said, behavior can be improved. It sure can. Yes. Thank you so much for that, Lisa. Planning ahead using weekends, Sunday to plan the week. Thanks, Anna. I agree. For me, because I struggle with these things too. We all do. And that for me is probably the most helpful. It takes some time on Sunday to look ahead. Awesome. Well, thank you guys all so much for sharing what was helpful to you in this webinar today. And also Sue said using self-talk, the idea of saying a mantra to yourself. Great. All right, so here's my contact information. I'm always available. Contact me anytime if we can help you in any way. We're here for you, and we have a page on our website, bctutoring.com, called Executive Function, and that has a whole list of all the things we help kids with. And we'd love to talk to you about how we could potentially help your student if you think that could be effective in your family. Thanks again, everybody, for coming today. I wish you all the very best for the remainder of the school year. Take care and bye-bye.